and the sense of danger became almost unbearable. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to stay calm. He smiled, revealing sharp teeth that seemed too perfect. "It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is whether you're willing to pay the price for what you want." "And what is it that I want?" I replied. He leaned toward me, and for a moment, I felt as though the weight of the world was on my shoulders. "Do you want success, money, respect? Do you want to be more than the mediocre man you are now?" I couldn't answer. It was as if he had read my mind, as if he knew every dark corner of my soul. And worst of all, he was right. "You just need to say yes and everything will be yours." For a second I thought about standing up and leaving, but something inside me, maybe desperation or curiosity, kept me there. "What do I have to do?" I asked, even though I already knew that was the wrong question. His smile widened and he extended his hand to me. His skin was as cold as marble, but when I touched it, I felt a burning heat travel up my arm. "Just say it," he whispered. "Yes." My heart raced, knowing I was crossing a line from which there would be no return, but the words left my mouth before I could stop them. "Yes." In that moment, the ground beneath my feet trembled, and the entire park seemed to fall into complete darkness. The man's laughter echoed in my head, a laugh I would never forget. When I came to, I was standing in front of the dead tree. The man had disappeared, but in my hand there was a paper, a contract written with my name and something more, my soul as collateral. I thought it was all a dream until the next day, when my life changed completely. The next day I woke up feeling strange. I wasn't tired like usual. On the contrary, it was as if some unknown energy was flowing through me. Everything seemed brighter, clearer, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of my problems crushing me. His voice sounded almost nervous, as if he was struggling to speak. "We've decided to promote you," he said abruptly without preamble. I had to sit down. I couldn't believe it. I had been asking for that position for years, struggling with no results, and suddenly, without warning, they gave it to me. Not even half an hour passed before another stroke of luck arrived. I opened my bank account and saw a deposit I didn't recognize. It was an absurd amount, enough to pay off my debts and then some. I looked at the details, but there was no explanation, just a reference number that made no sense. The whole day went like this, small coincidences that piled up until they seemed like miracles. The most complicated project at work, which had been stuck for weeks, suddenly solved itself with ease. My office mates, who had either ignored me or competed with me, now seemed to seek my approval. Even the coffee, which always came out bad from the machine, tasted perfect. But it wasn't until night that I remembered the contract. I found it in the pocket of my jacket, perfectly folded. I unfolded it. It was written in a language I didn't recognize, but the words seemed to form in my mind as if I could understand them. "That which is given is collected. That which is taken is returned." That phrase froze me. It was a warning, but it didn't explain how or when. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the bed, staring at the contract and trying to understand what I had done. For the first time, the euphoria of my new success was overshadowed by a sense of unease. At 3 a.m., when the silence was absolute, I heard something in my apartment. It was a whisper, a barely audible murmur. I got up thinking it was my imagination, but the sound repeated, coming from the living room. I walked cautiously, not turning on the lights, and there it was. At first, I didn't see it, but when my eyes adjusted to the dimness, I noticed it. A figure sitting on the armchair in the same position as the man. "Did you enjoy your day?" it asked in a deep voice. I didn't know what to say. My mind tried to find a logical explanation, but there was none. "What are you doing here?" I managed to murmur, though my voice trembled. The figure laughed softly, and the sound was like a knife cutting through the silence. "I came to remind you of something," it said, pointing to the contract still in my hand. "This is not just paper, it is a bond, a promise. What do you want from me?" I asked, almost in a strangled scream. The figure stood up, and though it didn't move quickly, I felt as though every step it took brought me closer to death. "Everything you want has a price. For now, enjoy your new life, but remember, every gift has its shadow." And without more, it disappeared. There was no smoke, no trick, it simply was no longer there, as if it had never existed. After that, I tried to return to normal, but it wasn't that easy. In the following days, things kept improving. I won an award at work, received invitations to events that were previously out of my reach, and even people who had ignored me began seeking me out with interest. But every time I enjoyed something new, I felt like something was watching me, an invisible weight, a constant presence that made me look over my shoulder. It was as if the shadow of that pact was waiting for the right moment to claim what was its. The days that followed were a mix of euphoria and paranoia. Everything in my life seemed to be going smoothly, New promotions, money coming in mysteriously, and the feeling that I was finally someone. However, the shadow of that encounter and the warning in the contract wouldn't leave me in peace. I started seeing things at first, small shadows passing at the edge of my vision or whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. I thought I was losing my sanity, but then the signs became impossible to ignore. One night, as I was coming home after a meeting at a fancy restaurant, I found my apartment door open. I knew I had locked it before leaving. I entered cautiously, and the first thing I noticed was the cold. It was an unnatural cold, one that pierced to the bone. In the living room, I saw something that made me shiver. The contract, the paper I always carried with me, was spread out on the table. But now there was something else. Beneath my signature, there was a date written in red letters that looked like blood. Today. Before I could react, the lights flickered and went out. The silence in the apartment was so deep that I could hear my own heart pounding. And then I saw him, the man from the park, sitting on my couch, with that smile that seemed capable of devouring me. "Did you enjoy your glory days?" he asked mockingly. I wanted to scream, run, do something, but my body wouldn't respond. "I gave you everything you wanted," he continued, "and now it's time for you to fulfill your part." I didn't know he was serious. I finally managed to scream. My voice was a desperate echo in the dark. He leaned toward me, and his eyes, those black abysses, trapped me again. "Everyone says the same, but that doesn't matter. What matters is the contract, and you signed it." The air grew heavy, and I felt as though something invisible was squeezing my chest. I fell to my knees, struggling to breathe as he stood up and began walking toward me. "But I'm a fair man," he said, stopping in front of me. "I'll give you one last choice. You can keep everything I gave you, but you'll lose the only thing that still belongs to you, your soul. Or you can give up everything and live the rest of your days as an ordinary man, with nothing but your memories of what could have been." My mind was torn between fear and desire. I knew what it meant to lose my soul, but how could I go back to my old life after having it all? "Decide," he demanded. "I don't have all night." Time seemed to stop as I wrestled with my decision. I looked at the deal on the table, the paper that had sealed my fate, and then I looked at him with his malicious smile. Finally, I took a deep breath and spoke with the little strength I had left. "Take it all from me." For a moment, his smile disappeared as if my answer had surprised him, but then it returned, darker and crueler than ever. "I knew your decision," he said, and with a snap of his fingers, everything disappeared. When I opened my eyes, I was in my old apartment, the one I had left when my life started changing. The walls were neglected, the air smelled of dampness, and everything seemed old and broken. I checked my bank account. Empty. My phone was full of messages about debts and problems. I had returned to my old life, but with one difference. I knew what I had lost, and I knew how close I had come to losing something much worse. Since then, I live with a constant reminder. Every night, when the clock strikes 3 a.m., I feel his presence in the dark. I don't see him, but I know he's there watching me, waiting. Because even though I gave up everything, pacts are never fully broken. A few years ago, when I was just starting to get back on my feet with my small business, I found myself in a desperate situation. The debts were drowning me, customers were few, and the bank was threatening to seize my property. It was during this moment of desperation when someone told me about Don Emiliano, a man known for fixing problems in exchange for a price that wasn't measured in money. At first, I took it as a joke, a deal with him, they would say mockingly. But the pressure overwhelmed me, and one night after closing my shop, I went to find him. The address was a ranch on the outskirts of the city, lost among dusty roads. I arrived at an old house with broken windows and a heavy air that made it hard to breathe. Don Emiliano received me as if he were expecting me. He had a penetrating gaze and a twisted smile that seemed to read every corner of my soul. "You know what you're looking for, and you know the price it carries," he said bluntly. "What price?" I asked, pretending to be brave. "Your life. But not now, later, when you least expect it." The atmosphere in the room was suffocating, and the air seemed charged with electricity. I hesitated, but I was so deep in it that I accepted. Don Emiliano handed me an old paper with symbols I didn't recognize. I understood. He asked me to sign with my blood, using a knife he gave me. When my signature was marked on that strange contract, the candles in the room suddenly went out. A suffocating heat filled the place, and in the darkness, I heard a deep, hoarse voice. "The deal is done," it said. Flames rose from the ground, forming the figure of a tall, terrifying shadow. It had no face, but its eyes, like two glowing coals, pierced through me. "You'll get what you're looking for," it added. "But remember, I am always watching." As I left that mansion, I felt as if I had left a part of myself behind in that place. I couldn't imagine what would come next. The following day, everything began to change.